Hi there, and welcome to another video on my channel. In this video, we're going to look at how you, as a product manager, can use Mixpanel to drive product growth, make better decisions, and show the impact of your work. So let's jump right into the Mixpanel dashboard. Now, we are going to use demo data for all the reports and walkthroughs we're going to use today. A lot of the client data I have is generally private. I cannot show it, but the demo data is pretty good. One thing to keep in mind about the demo data is sometimes it can be a little bit too perfect, might be the best way to describe it. This is data that's typically generated by Mixpanel on some kind of script or formula, and they try to estimate what a regular data metrics and benchmarks might look like for a specific business type. This one is a SaaS business, particularly a B2B SaaS business. So we'll see a lot of reports around monthly recurring revenue and annual recurring revenue and so forth. Now, before we look at any reports, just to give you a quick overview of Mixpanel as a whole, the building blocks in Mixpanel are events. Let's see if we can find a profile here. Again, this is sample data. Everything here, it's fake data. Now, whenever you implement Mixpanel, you're going to end up with something like this. If you do the implementation correctly, there's lots of videos in my channel walking you through the technical details of implementation. You can share that with your engineers. But generally, you want a profile with all the events or actions this user has taken within your product. We can see here there's events such as document edited, document opened, document commented. We can get a sense that this sample data set is some kind of document product, maybe like something similar to DocuSign. Every event will then have specific properties that are passed by your team. For example, this document edit event has properties such as document type or time spent editing. This is probably minutes. And we can see an entire timeline of data here for months and years for any given user. Then on the left-hand side, we're going to have profile properties. Some are collected by Mixpanel automatically, like city and country, and some are passed on manually, such as preferred futures here or the user ID. So this is your success. So as long as you have this, you can do everything else we're going to talk about here. Now, the building blocks are, of course, the events, such as this one, the event properties, and the user profile properties. These are the three building blocks we can use. Again, some are passed on manually by your team, and some are default. They are collected by Mixpanel out of the box. So let's jump into your go-to report inside Mixpanel. This is Insights. This report is going to be most likely the most helpful, the one you're going to use the most, simply because it's just the easiest way to slice and dice your data. So for example, we can use this to get raw stats on anything in really just a matter of seconds, right? You want to look at, for example, how many documents were created over this is the last 30 days. In this case, we can look at, for example, total events. And this will tell us how many documents were created on a daily basis. And if we go into, let's say, a bar chart, then we get this total number, right? So over the last 30 days, there was an estimate of 33,000 documents created in this time period. Some things that may affect these numbers may be how you implement Mixpanel, if you do on the client side versus the backend side. But generally, this gives you a rough ballpark over any kind of number, any kind of raw stats on anything that gets released. And you can imagine, if you release a new feature, you want to know just quickly on the raw basis, how is this feature being adopted? How many users did a specific feature or a specific event? Is this number changing or week to week? Is this growing larger, smaller, and so forth? Now, once you have this basic event here, we can do several things, right? We went from unique users to total events. That's one thing you can look at. You could also look at, for example, frequency of per user. So if we take something like a distribution, so now we can see that about 83% of all the users over this time period did this event one time, and then about 10% of users did it 2 times, and then 2% 3 times, and so forth, down the line, right? Of whatever we have. Let's go back to total events. We could also do breakdowns. So if you go to the event itself, these are all the event properties. Remember, our second building block that we have for this specific event. Some are default, like region and operating system, and some are manually. If you look at, for example, document type, we can then break it out this is the different document types that are being passed on and the total number of events per this document type. We can keep adding breakdowns as needed. For example, perhaps when I use a document type and the template use. Then we get this breakdown. Now let's say, we are particularly interested in the essay document type. So let's do a filter here. Let's go find the same document type. Choose essay. Now we only get this data, right? Just the essay and of course the template use. Now let's keep adding. Now let's say we want to see it by city. Let's say we are primarily focused in the United States, and we want to know if there's any kind of interesting patterns on the city side. So now we can see, for some reason in this demo data, the port hardcourt is the sort of primary want with Legos in a couple of places. That's kind of intriguing, right? Maybe we want to look at by operating system. Let's see what we have here, right? Great. So we have some data here, Android, Windows, and so on. Just a note, real data doesn't tend to be as nicely distributed as this. And sometimes you'll look at things like operating system and you don't get quite the answers you're looking for. So you kind of have to keep digging until you find what you need or if it needs to be added as a tracking mechanism. So right away, right? So we're doing raw stats. We're doing this very quickly. We can go from a very general number, like how many documents were created, and start to filter down to lots of different permutations of that question. But all of it is happening within a few seconds. You can see the Mixpanel data is real time, and it'll flows very easily. The second usage here, of course, it will be any kind of ad hoc question you might get from a boss or colleague. If you say, hey, how is this feature being adopted? How was the product launch? How the growth of the same documents created changing over time? Great place, right? And once you have this chart, you can save it into boards, which are the dashboards. We're going to see those in a second. You can, of course, just copy the URL here in the top right. This is actually quite helpful. A lot of times when I work with clients, they have all these ad hoc questions, and it doesn't quite make sense to save it into a dashboard itself. It's not really a permanent report. It's just something they want to know right away. It can quickly be built in a few minutes or seconds sometimes. And I can just send a direct link to that person and they'll see this exact same view. They can then, of course, make their own changes if they are familiar with Mixpanel, or they might just be happy being able to see this. So this is just really powerful. Being able to send a direct link to a specific question within minutes, I think is really, really powerful and really one of the key value propositions of a tool like Mixpanel. Now, of course, we can also take this data out. So we can export it either to PNG or and depending on the report itself, you will also have an option to export to CSV, which again is also really helpful. If you need to dive into numbers, sometimes it's a little faster actually to do it in Excel, especially if you have more experience in Excel or Google Sheets. So you get those couple options. Right, so that's insights, and there's of course lots more things. We can see lots of other things you can do. We can do filters at the event level. We can actually add multiple events. We can combine them. There's some aggregations we could do here. So there's lots of things you can dive into. But this is generally your go-to. What I recommend, whenever I work with product managers who are just becoming familiar with Mixpanel, is start at the high level, is start to answer your raw stats, and then keep digging down, add in breakdowns, add in filters. And over time, you can add pretty sophisticated elements to your query, because that's really what you're building here on the right, all within a few minutes. You'll kind of start to build that comfort level for what this report looks like and what you can do. You can even compare, right? So you can do comparisons to previous time periods and so forth. So lots of little things. There's a lot of depth here that you can dive into. Now, the second thing that'll be helpful here in Mixpanel is to really understand your flows. And there's two reports that can kind of give us that. Let's start with the most basic one first, which is funnels. Funnels are really great because you can look at any kind of flow in your product and understand the drop-off rates between steps. A classic flow is, of course, like an e-commerce checkout flow where someone looks at a product, they add it to cart, they then go through the cart checkout process, and then they make their payment. You can also imagine like a food delivery app where you look at a restaurant, you add dishes to your cart, you go to your cart, and then you place your order. In this case, we're going to build, let's call it like an onboarding funnel. So let's go sign up. Let's go document open. And let's have a third step for document downloaded. Great. Right away, within seconds, we kind of get this report. We're trying to understand here, when users signed up for this hypothetical B2B DocuSign type product, how many of those users signed up, step one, then open a document, and then how many of those users then download a document. This might perhaps be a flow of the end user. If you imagine you're receiving a document, you create your account, you open and you download it. We might have a separate flow, for example, for the maybe creator flow for people who sign up and then create a document and then share it. So we can build all those as needed. So now we have this flow. We can see, the overall conversion rate is 37%. And of course, we see the drop off from step to step. Just like before, we have ways to dive into. We can do filters at the event level. So perhaps, we don't want all the signups. Perhaps we only want the signups from a specific UTM campaign. So let's say we only want Google and Facebook. Let's see what this looks like. So the number came down quite a bit, right? So now we're saying, for only users with this specific UTM source, these are the UTM parameters that typically are used in marketing attribution. How many of those users then open the document, download it, and so forth. Let's remove it to get a little bit more data. Down here, we can have a conversion criteria. You can think about this as a conversion window. We might make this window wide, let's say over 30 days or maybe 7 days. If you imagine you have a 7-day trial, a 7-day window, of course, makes sense. Or perhaps we want to make the window quite tight. We can actually go as low as seconds. So perhaps we want to say, hey, you know what? Within 5 minutes of user signing up, how many people do this? In this case, not a lot, right? If you actually want to know this, let's go back to 7 days. If you're actually not sure what the right window should be, we can go from funnel steps there in what we're seeing into time to convert. And let's look at the average. So this tells us that the average conversion for this entire funnel is actually 2 days. So 7 days might be a good window. Maybe we make it 5 days or 3 days. So let's go back to just conversion rate. And we'll go back to funnel steps. And then we have the same filters as before. We were using a document type, I believe, the previous one, and we can do breakdowns as well. Breakdowns in particular can actually be quite nice, just because we can see, for example, the breakdown by all the UTM sources, not just the Google and Facebook, but we see all of them here, and then we can kind of get a gauge as to what are the biggest ones. So a large percentage of the users who are signing up are, of course, not set. This could be just an organic type of UTM where there are no UTMs. But if you look at the ones that are set, we do have TikTok and YouTube, Reddit, organic, Google. It's kind of interesting, organic and not set. There might be some logic here to having them separate. And then we can see the conversion rate for all of those breakdowns across the entire funnel. Just like before, we can send a direct link at the top right. We can save this to a dashboard if we so want to. And of course, we can export this data as needed. So this is one way to understand flows. Funnels are particularly helpful if you know what the actual steps are. So you have a concrete set of steps that you want to look at, like your onboarding process or a checkout funnel or in any other funnels you can imagine. If you don't have a concrete steps, then we have a second report for that, and that is actual flows. So flows allows for an exploration of potential steps. So the basic question we're trying to answer here is, when a user does a certain action, where do they go after that? So let's put the sign up event again here, as our initial event. So right away, what we see is the different potential paths that users go through after they sign up. So we can see, there's one path here, another path here, a third path, and then there's a sort of a combination of all the other events into this big path. Now we can start to export this. And the key of the flows report is you actually really want to make it as specific as possible. So you actually do need to filter and remove things over time. So let's see what we can do. So we can, for example, hide events. We have this event called future use, but perhaps we don't care too much about that event. So let's hide it. Future use. Okay, and now let's add more rows. So we kind of have 3 primary rows and then this kind of catch-all, but we can add more. And let me see. Right here, we can add a row. And let's do that a couple more times. Great. So now our catch-all is a little bit smaller. And now we can see a little bit more, right? We can see document created, document shred, document edited. Home screen, again, may not be that helpful. So let's hide that. We may not care too much if they went to the home screen. Okay, now we have rows here, right? We can keep adding rows as needed, of course. Just like before, we can expand by a property. This is sort of the equivalent of a breakdown. And we actually go find the UTM source we were looking at before, that we can get the same path here. The breakdowns aren't always as clear as to where they're going for, but you do have the ability to do that. And we can see here that the expand was added here. So we can also add this manually. There's the filter, there's the breakdown, of course. Let's actually put this here for breakdown and see. The breakdown in the flows is more related to cohorts. So we can actually build cohorts. For example, we can say a cohort of new users, anyone who has signed up in the last 30 days. We may have power users, perhaps users who have created 2 or more documents in the last 30 days, active users, dormant, and so forth. Right? We can have different definitions. So if we actually put a cohort of new users as a breakdown, the entire thing then gets broken down into 2 groups. People who belong to this cohort, the purple, the new user, and people who don't belong to this cohort, right? And we can see what the differences between those 2 groups. So again, flows is clearly an exploration type event report where we have to play around with different things. We have to add, we have to remove until we get a general sense and say, you know what, it does seem like a significant portion of users are going from sign up to document created, but perhaps we actually want them to go into document open first, or vice versa, whatever it might be. We can keep adding steps. So this is 3 steps. We can of course add more steps here. So we can increase this to say 4 or 5 steps. And we can add steps before. So we can actually have a logic where perhaps it's not a starting event like a sign up, but perhaps the final event like document created. And then we looked at the 3 or 5 steps that users took before they got to that event. So just different ways to explore flows. But again, think of this as exploration. You gotta play around. You gotta kind of see different things. You can share this actually just like before again, right? The same sort of functionality still exists throughout almost all the Mixpanel reports. But this may be slightly confusing to people if there's no certain like logic as to how this was created or what they're supposed to be looking at. Quick break before we go on to retention. If you're looking for help to set up your Mixpanel data or to help your team adopt some of the things we're looking at in this video, especially how you build this reports quickly within seconds or minutes, get in touch. I work with a handful of companies every year, and I help them either with the data implementation or with this process on how to extract more insights from their existing data. So links are in the description box below, and you can also go to rubenugarte.com/analytics or /insights, and then you can see what is the best one for you. If this is not you and you're just enjoying the content, then a like or a comment is greatly appreciated. That always helps myself and other people discover this video. With that being said, let's go back to our regular video. Third, let's look at retention. So retention is really powerful. It's a way to understand this long-term engagement for your product. So let's build something simple. Let's take a retention where users signed up and then they create a document. So let's see what we have here. So we have 30 days. Let's actually make it 3 months. And let's actually break it down by week instead of monthly, and we'll keep the retention curve. So down here, we have on a weekly basis, so you see June 17th, 24th, July 1st, and so forth. We first have the total number of users, called profiles in this case, but users who has signed up, which is step 1. So we see that on June 24th, there were 213 users who signed up. And then we see that the percentage of those users who created a document either within less than 1 day or 1 day or day 2, day 3, day 4, and so forth. We can actually go this from each day to perhaps week. You can imagine that a B2B product might benefit from weekly retention rather than daily retention compared to, let's say, a mobile game where daily retention is really important, or even like some kind of consumer product. So once again, you may not have these answers right away, but with some exploration, you can get a sense to say, weekly retention makes more sense, or perhaps monthly, or perhaps even seasonal, right? You think of something like tax software, gets heavy usage during a specific period of the year and then low usage throughout the rest of the year. So depending on what your product is, the retention buckets will change. So in this case, as a B2B product, let's assume that weekly retention kind of makes sense. This kind of document type product that might be used once or twice a week. So we see the number of profiles created during any given week, and then the percentage of those profiles that fired or did the document created week 2, week 3, week 4, and of course we can see sort of the weighted average here at the top, so we can get a general sense to say, you know what, on week 4, the average retention was 24%. Up here, we see the retention curve, which is nice. So we can kind of see how this retention curve is changing over time. If you're in the consumer products, you're likely very familiar with sort of D1, D7, D30 retention. There are benchmarks for many of these things. So you can actually compare your numbers compared to your industry and understanding, you know what's my week 4 retention and how does that compare to other B2B similar products to mine. Just like before, we have sort of the same ideas. We can add filters at the chart level. We can add breakdowns. The breakdowns can get a bit funky, especially when it comes to retention. Some of the formulas are a bit estimated, but if we want to kind of see it, just like before, right? We, instead of having the weekly breakdowns, we actually move away to the breakdown by, in this case, UTM source, and we can kind of see that retention over time. Just keep in mind that some of these things are, the data works, but there has to be some adjustments to kind of make this data work, just the nature of the chart. You know, you're kind of grouping users based on a breakdown here instead of a week, and then looking at those users over time. Now, Mixpanel can do all this for you behind the scenes, so you can still get some interesting answers. And just like before, there are other ways to look at this data, whether it's just a line or perhaps just a metric. Just different ways. And there's other more advanced filters you can add to this specific chart to kind of get down to more specific groups of users to understand how they are performing against each other. And finally, once you have your key reports, you may have some things you keep only for yourself, maybe just in a document somewhere that you open. But if you want to share something with colleagues, your boss or other individuals, dashboards or boards are a fantastic tool. Here's just a sample dashboard that was created for this data. You can, of course, see the same chart styles we just saw before, where there are some of those line trends or other kind of breakdowns by different event properties. We can see single metrics. We can see other metrics. We can see this kind of text section, which I think is really nice. So you can add explanations, whether it's titles, subtitles, or just text in general. So I find that's really helpful when you create a chart or multiple charts in the dashboard to be able to provide context for anyone who will be viewing this dashboard, and even questions perhaps to say, hey, here are the key questions we're working on in terms of product growth. Here's the charts that are kind of supporting or trying to answer those questions. This is section 1. Section 2, here's what we're trying to accomplish. Here are the questions. Here's some general helpful context for the charts you're about to see, and so forth. And then section 3 and then section 4 and so forth. You can, of course, create multiple dashboards. Many of my clients tend to have boards by specific type. So we may have a marketing and attribution board, then the product growth, and then maybe something around revenue data in particular. So lots of different ways to slice it. There's no best way. You just choose whatever makes sense for your company. And of course, because of the nature of boards, you can place things in multiple boards anywhere. You can take a chart and place it in multiple boards. Boards themselves, you can share links. You can add filters. You can make them private or public. So lots of different variations here. And of course, for anyone who's looking at a board, they can actually just click into any chart and go into the report portions we just saw earlier. So lots of sort of flexibility here when it comes to how you actually work with the data itself. And that is all I have for today. This is a short video to help you as a product manager, or product director, or someone in charge of product to understand how you can use Mixpanel and the core Mixpanel reports to drive product growth, to make better decisions, and to, of course, show the impact of the work and the things that you are working on. Now, final things before we hop off. Again, if you're a company who might be looking for more in-depth help with your Mixpanel data, whether to set up Mixpanel or to really get the most out of your data, look at my website. That's rubenugarte.com. There's a couple ways I work with a handful of companies every year, and one of them might be a good fit for you. Second, there is a link to my book, The Data Mirage, Why Companies Fail to Actually Use Their Data. Very helpful book. It really comes out of all the work I've done with over 80 plus companies. And it just gives you a lot of different insights and strategies on how you can make the most out of your data, from the setup to the usage to converting those insights into actionable decisions. Finally, if you enjoyed this video, make sure you like, subscribe, and comment. That really helps me, helps the algorithm. And if you have any questions, please post them in the comment section below. I'll do my best to answer them, of course. With that being said, my name is Ruben Ugarte. We'll talk next week.